Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to this episode of the Learning Journeys podcast from Lacuna Learning. Thank you so much everyone for listening and subscribing. It's always a bit of a surprise to me to see how many people tune in, and we just hope you're keeping really well just now. So thanks very much for listening in. I can't quite believe the introduction I'm about to give, and I reckon this is probably going to be one of those moments in my life where the words are going to hopefully come out, which is the general idea of the podcast, but I won't quite believe that I actually said them. In today's episode, we are delighted, honoured and privileged to be joined by 5-time Olympian, 4-time world champion and 3-time Olympic silver medalist, Frances Houghton MBE. Frances was the first British woman to be selected for 5 Olympic Games in rowing and only the 5th woman in any sport to achieve this mark for Team GB. Over her incredible 21-year career on the British rowing team, in addition to her Olympic and World Championship success, she also held 2 world records, all in different teams and under 4 different coaches. She retired on the Olympic podium in Rio in 2016, having made history as part of the first British women's 8 ever to win an Olympic medal. Now a published author and former professional cook, not chef, she corrected me on that when we met before, Frances is still working in rowing as a mentor to athletes, as well as great work for UK Sport and the EIS on panels for strategy, culture, health checks and so on. She's an advocate for mental health support and sits on UK Sport Mental Health Steering Group as athlete representative. After a life-changing experience training as a cook in Ireland and a few years working in professional kitchens, she stepped away from that space and started writing. She has recently self-published her book, Learnings from 5 Olympic Games, which has been described as like stumbling across an Olympian's notebook and is as much a handbook of lessons from performance as is the story of her incredible journey. I have a copy of the book. I thoroughly recommend it, and we'll hopefully chat about it a bit later on. And very often on the pod, I know the guests quite well. We have some kind of pre-existing relationship, which is absolutely not the case here. Simply somebody I admired from a distance for many, many, many years. We'll get into it later on, hopefully, but I have this really vivid memory of her impossibly long arms wrapped around her teammates in Beijing after missing out on gold in the last 100 meters, and just that comfort and support that she was trying to offer at that time. And then the contrast to Rio 8 years later. I'm just so excited to have her along to share her journey. And so thank you so much for your time, Frances.
Oh, thank you, Doug. What an amazing introduction. Some of that I sort of struggle to relate to anymore, but I guess that was my former self. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Standard warm-up question though for everyone. If you could go on an adventure anywhere in the world, COVID restrictions are gone, where would you go? Who would you go with? And what would you do?
Right. So I've given this a fair bit of thought. And you know what? I've come back to going back to my mum's, which is in Oxfordshire. It's not very far away, but it's where I spent the first lockdown this time last year. And she had a wonderful garden, and it was a special time to be able to spend unadulterated permission to spend lots of time with someone and enjoy a garden and do things with her. And I could go anywhere in the world, with these COVID restrictions gone, but actually it's time spent with someone, and to appreciate it and to feel like the world has just pressed pause for a moment. I would go back there.
What an answer. I mean, I didn't know what you were going to say. You live in Cornwall now, and I thought you might say something close to home. You might go back to somewhere you went to with rowing, but what an amazing answer. People have been all over the world with that question, but you're like, I would just see my mum and spend time with her. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Now, one of the challenges of this podcast, as we were laughing about before, is you were a successful athlete for 21 years. And so for us to do those 21 years justice, we would just need to be here forever, which would be great, but probably not for our listeners' interest. So we're going to dive in and out of some stuff. I would love it so much if you could tell us a bit, maybe about your early sport experiences and that journey into the GB program. If you could just take us back to that time and how that journey played out.
Yeah, right. So, I'm glad we're not going to go blow by blow through every year. That would be a bit much for me, let alone anyone else. But I think the first thing to say is, and genuinely, I was not a sporty kid. When I did the long jump, I often did not make the sand section, still landed on the bit of tarmac. In swimming, it's barely much more than floating. But I did have a really sporty elder sister. And every time I turned up to PE, my teachers would get really excited, say, "Oh, you're going to be even better than her. This is brilliant." And then they'd see me not jump, not even try to jump, and, really not move very fast in any direction. And that was the reason I tried rowing. I got fed up with being compared to my elder sister and being a perpetual disappointment. And thought, I'm just going to try the only sport she hasn't tried. And I was really fortunate. There was rowing at my school. There was a river at the bottom of the playing fields. And, it was in Oxford. So I had an awareness of rowing as a sport already. And I loved it from the beginning. I am an introvert. It was a place where I felt I could be peaceful. But it was also a place where I realized there are other people doing the same thing and love it as much as I do. And we have this to talk about. So sport really at this point became a vehicle for so much more than just, exercise or sport as we sometimes see it. And, I just became really hooked on being out on the water and moving a boat. And that's what I took to, through my teenage years. I was just desperate to continue. And I thought, well, seeing as I've never been sporty in my life, I will just carry on until other people overtake me, because of course everyone will overtake me. I started very young as a woman, and I just thought, well, when other people give it a go, they will be much better than me. But it just took them a bit longer than I figured. And I think when I was 16, I watched the Atlanta Olympics on the TV, and I just thought, I really, really want to see if I can do that. The celebration of sport, the being amongst the best in the world. It was actually after the Atlanta Olympic Games when a former pupil of my school came back from competing at those games, and he told us all about it, what an incredible experience it had been. And I remember sitting, just watching him, sort of the words falling out of his mouth, and the images in my brain becoming kind of bigger and bigger. And I took the menu card on the table that I was on, because it was a dinner, and I found a pen and I wrote on the back of it, "I will do everything I can to get to Sydney 2000." So I guess that was the beginning of my real clean focus on, this is what I want to try and make happen. I don't know if I will, but this is where I want to concentrate. And, I really believe it'll be worth it.
It was as good as I was hoping for, that intro. I love that, not the sporty kid. And that it just took them a bit longer than I expected to get better than me. I just think that's hilarious given where it went. Okay, Atlanta. I remember those games. We didn't win a lot of medals. There was, however, our only goal was in rowing. There was another medal in rowing as well. Sydney, you described that to me when we chatted before as the athletes' games. What was Sydney like?
Sydney was spectacular. When I remember it, I think of, when you're a little kid and you get to go to those play areas and there's like a swimming pool full of colourful balls, and there are like inflatable slides, and there's everything you could ever dream of, and the sweet shop's free. It was like that as an adult. It was just a spectacle of, it's the wrong kind of way to describe it, but it was a spectacle as well as this incredible warm feeling. I felt so welcome. It was the only games actually where we stayed in the village, instead of in Athens, Beijing, London, and Rio. We stayed in a hotel and only moved into the village afterwards. But I could see the Olympic flame from my bedroom window. We went to the opening ceremony. I saw Kathy Freeman light the flame. I saw her run her 400-meter final. And, to be in a stadium of thousands of people, absolutely expectant, holding their breath, and for her to come in and this full lycra suit and to pull the hood up over her head and kneel down and deliver the performance that she was expected to deliver. And the light bulbs just went. It was silence, but the light bulbs of camera flashes just going off around this 400-meter stadium. And then for her to cross the line and the whole stadium erupted. That for me is the standout memory from all my Olympic games, as well as obviously seeing Steve Redgrave win his 5th Olympic gold medal. And when I say that lake out in Penrith, just outside Sydney, was trembling that morning, honestly, it felt there was so much anticipation in the Olympic world, not just the rowing world, of what might happen that day. And to see that performance, and the other guys in the crew as well, was incredible. I
got slightly chilled there talking about that. I actually, years and years later, I went to Melbourne and I've seen Kathy's suit. It's like in a museum. It's up, so you can see it for all to be there. And it's like, wow, you can sort of feel that bit of history.
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that. Yeah.
So I remember the moment as well. And it was, quite something. Now, you've talked about when you're in Sydney that you paint it not quite as well as actually happened, but which is that you said you came last in the Olympics, but you decided there that you were going to set a pretty big goal for yourself at those games. Where did that come from?
Right. So in Sydney, although I did come, I think it was last or second last, I've sort of wiped it from my brain. It wasn't great, basically. I did know going into it that I was unlikely to reach the heights of the Olympic podium. But what I did do is when I stepped onto that plane, I made a promise to myself that I had worked so hard to try and become an Olympian that I would fill myself with positive thoughts and appreciation of what I would experience in Sydney from the moment I stepped on the plane. So I'm really glad that I did that, because even though the performance wasn't great, I had the presence of mind, even though I was still quite young, to say appreciate it, which I'm glad I did. And of course, that was where the women in my sport won their first ever Olympic medal. And there were these other Olympic medals in the men's team as well. And I knew that I had trained alongside these other athletes, and I was, I believed I was as good as them. And it made me think, although initially when I went to Sydney, I thought I only ever want to become an Olympian once, and then I'm going to go and get a proper job. By the time I came back, I was thinking, how many more times could I possibly do that? Because that was an incredible experience, and I'd like to have it again and again and again. So it was actually when I was back in the UK, I went back to university. I was at King's College London, studying Hispanic studies and Latin. I went straight back to lectures, and it was September, October 2000. I was coming back from lectures. I was sat on my scooter on the embankment, and I can still absolutely see it now. I had the Houses of Parliament on my left, and it was a really drizzly day, and the traffic lights were red. And I was sat there and I was just remembering what an incredible experience it had been in Sydney. And I looked at my hand. It had like my scooter gloves on, big fat black gloves. And I lifted the visor of my helmet and wiped away the drizzle. I was just sort of tapping my foot, thinking about all the things we'd done in Sydney. And I counted out on my fingers how many Olympic games I could possibly fit in before I'd be too old. And conveniently, there are 5 fingers on our hands. And it turned out that I could possibly fit in 5 games before I reckoned I'd be too old. And no woman at that point had been to 5 games in rowing. And so that's when I made what was then my second vow to myself, to say, right, I want to be the first woman to go to 5 Olympic games in rowing, and I want to win Olympic gold.
I love how clearly you remember that moment in the rain. Just going, actually, do you know what? This is a crystallizing moment. Something came together for you there. So you've returned to the UK as an Olympian. You're Olympian for life, right? No one ever takes that away from you. And you decide, I'm going to go off and do this 4 more times, and I want to win gold. What was the journey like from there through to Athens in 2004?
Well, I think those first early years, and often I see this in younger athletes, you can't help but get better because you're young, you're doing more training, you inevitably you're improving. I felt like I had a bit of a sort of point to prove. So I was, really head down. I was trying to balance my studies and my rowing. And at the time, I really found it hard. I just felt like I was doing everything not as well as I could. So my training was being compromised by my work, and my studies were compromised by how tired I was from the training. And I was constantly wishing that I could be a full-time athlete. But now when I look back on it, I realize actually that was when I was the best athlete in my whole career, because I am a thinker, and it meant that I had to compartmentalize the time that I spent on thinking about rowing and the time that I spent thinking about my studies. And actually it was a lot cleaner. It was a lot more efficient. And it's definitely when I performed at my best. If I had a trial coming up or, an important race, I would just think 15 minutes before, right, what do I need to do? And just have a real clear understanding, right, I need to do this, this and this, rather than mulling it over for days and days and days and massively overthinking what is actually really quite simple, which is delivering what we already have inside of us, to the best that we can on that day. So I found it hard balancing all the way up to Athens, but they were really good performance years for myself. And I ended up in a crew of every year I was so lucky to row with incredible teammates. But the Athens crew really was special. Three of us that were the same age, and one, Alison Mowbray, is a bit older, but probably more fun than the rest of us, who were really head down, concentrating, trying to deliver like young people sometimes can be. But it was brilliant fun, and some of the best racing I ever did.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong here. Going into Athens as opposed to Sydney, you were a pretty well-established crew with some like legit credentials going into those games. What was it like going in there, knowing that you had a really realistic shot of picking up some medals at the games?
Right. So yeah, it's true. So leading up into Athens, we were only as a crew for probably 5 months, but we'd had a good World Cup season. It seems like we were, as you say, an established crew now, but I think we just hit the ground running in our first race. And in the second or third race, I can't remember which one it was, but I think we beat the Germans, and it was the first time a British crew had ever beaten the Germans. So at that point, we knew that we were in a really good position, and there was a real balance in our crew between me being the one saying, we can always get better, let's still get better, let's keep moving forward, whereas other personalities in the crew wanting to make sure we never forgot how good we already were, and to make sure we didn't forget that. We're just trying to put stuff on top. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel every time to see how good it can be. So it was nerve-wracking, but it was exciting. And I think one of the things that we did in this crew was we were very conscious that we were 4 introverts. And so we had to make sure that we had a sort of, we knew that we had blind spots, and to make sure that we didn't overthink stuff. But what we did do was, and Rebecca Romero, actually, who sat at stroke and went on 4 years later to win individual gold in cycling. It was an absolute privilege to row with her. But something she did very, very well was, in training, we would improve each individual part of a race. And then when we came to race, it was like we'd stitch together all the best bits that we'd ever done in training. And I remember in our races just sitting there thinking, wow, this is great. This is just the best rowing we've ever done. And I think that's really the only time I ever felt that. But she was an incredible athlete, and I felt very fortunate to have been able to row with her and row with people who, we gave each other space to be who we wanted to be.
I've got about 100 questions from what you've just said there, but I'll need to just watch my time and just ask them carefully. I mean, lots of things going on there. Let's pick on the introvert thing first, as a very openly introverted person. Later in your book, you talk about this, that you did some personality profiling as a squad years later, and you describe it as you got that profile back and thought, oh, it must be amazing to work with someone like me who's so focused on getting all the details right and so driven. And it was only when you began to reconsider that you considered the flip side of that. I wonder if you could just chat about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I got the information back on my profile, which was incredibly accurate, and it was very powerful to be able to read it. I found it very, very useful. And I did also think, well, that's great. I'm really driven. I'll do anything for the team. I'm a hard worker, the last one to leave the gym, all of that. But then, of course, with some expert facilitation, the psychologist encouraged us to talk about how we felt, around other personalities. And of course, for me, being around extroverts, I find that quite crowding. It's a lot of energy. And then they started to talk about what it's like to be around people like me. And that was when I realized, oh, okay, so it can be really overbearing. It can feel like you never reach high enough standards. It can feel suffocating and just too intense. And I thought I realized this is the impact I'm having on others, where I thought I was instilling in others, that I believed in them and that we can do this. There's so much we can do. Of course we can do this. Like, let's do it together. That didn't feel like that. On the receiving end, that feels uncomfortable, and not like those people didn't feel like they could express themselves fully and freely. So that was a real realization point for me. It was quite funny as well, because the first time we did this was in 2004, and the psychologist laid out a cross in the middle of the room, and he put extroverts on one end of the room, introverts on the other. And myself and Rebecca Romero, we sort of scrambled for the far side of the room. And then she opened the door, and one of us tried to get out the door to get even further away. So that's how much sort of peace and quiet some of us love to have. But it's so good to know the impact that you have on others.
I'm laughing. People that know me quite well would say, oh, yeah, that sounds like somebody else we know. It's even worse when your children start doing the same thing. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, and you've kind of dovetailed into it really nicely there, that crew came together just 5 months out from the games. How did you come together so quickly? You've chatted a bit about different personalities or similar personalities and that kind of thing. How did you go about like bringing together a team that's got to perform at such a high level so quickly?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think every team has a different answer. And in a way, there isn't an answer, and there isn't a key, and there isn't a method. Sometimes it works, sometimes it just clicks, and sometimes it should work and never does. And when I talk about teamwork, I'm always really keen to encourage people to understand that, don't give yourselves a hard time if you think it should come together, because, I was on the team for 21 years, every time, every year, every day, with amazing, incredible people with pretty much the same goal. Yes, for different reasons, but I was in a handful of crews that really worked and gelled. So, there are many, many teams that it's just intangible that don't come together. But in answer to your question, in Athens, myself, Debbie Flood and Rebecca Romero, we had come up through the junior system together. And so we knew each other really well. And I had a great friendship with Alison Mowbray, who the first day that I came onto the squad to try and make the team in Sydney, she welcomed me and she actually said, I know that you might take one of our seats, but, you will make us stronger as well. And that was incredibly powerful. And she looked out for me and she sort of showed me the ropes, and we've remained really close friends ever since. And I think it's not about being friends, but if you know each other well enough that you feel safe to be honest with each other, because you can be honest, and the other people will respect that. And of course, often when something is said, I definitely respond defensively to things, but to know that I'm going to come back again the next day and say, no, but I know the reason why you're saying this, and, I'm in this with you and I respect you. I think that's where, we had bonds already in that particular crew in Athens. Whereas by contrast, the crew in Rio, and I know we'll come on to this, but just in answer to the personality questions, we were very, very different people. We had a massive range of experiences. I had been to 4 games already. There was someone who'd never been on a senior team before. And we were a whole mix of different personalities, but we had seen through the selection process how much each of us wanted it, and how much we were prepared to lay ourselves bare for what we wanted to be a part of. And I think seeing your teammates put themselves on the line for themselves and for each other, you really get to know them and you really respect that. And I think that enabled us to have that level of relationship again, where we could be honest, we could trust each other under pressure. And that's where we could really work together.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll definitely come back to that incredible sassy 8s. We'll get to them later on in the story. You set this goal of winning an Olympic gold medal, and on your second time at the games, first time as a realistic medal prospect, you come away with silver. What was that experience like?
It was amazing to win an Olympic medal. I think we all felt disappointed because we felt we had the capability to win. The people who did win, the Germans, they had strengthened their crew since we beat them for 6 weeks before, which was a compliment. It was flattering that they thought that they needed to put their best rower. Their sort of equivalent of Matthew Pinsent, they transferred into their crew against us. But, it was a first medal for all of us, and no one's going to waste that moment, right? It was great fun, and we're proud of ourselves. It was mixed emotions, but I did stand there on the podium and I looked across and I thought, I really believe that I could stand in the middle of this podium. So that's where my concentration is for next time.
And of course, there was a next time. It wasn't that far away in your case because you kept going to games. Could you give us a bit of an insight, I guess, that journey from, okay, you've kind of come in, you've done the first games, you've then progressed through, you've committed, you want to really go after this. You come away with silver medal, an incredible achievement for most, even normal people, but you didn't stop there. You kept going. What was the journey like going into Beijing?
Yeah, so from Athens until Beijing, it was all about winning. You know, from the first day we came together in the autumn of 2004, the mission was to win gold in the women's quad. We had this basis of the silver in Athens. The personnel wouldn't necessarily stay the same, but we'd identified that as, you know, that should be our mission. And although we've already spoken about a bit of reflection about self-awareness, I don't think I'd really understood that fully at that stage. I was very much, as I say, focused on winning. I felt that I really wanted to be a driver. And the way that I look back at it now, I can see that maybe I was, you know, I think possibly we could describe it as being a bit of a dictator, that this is how we've done it before. This is what works. This is what we can do, and really trying to emulate what we'd done before. And the competition for the seats was really, really tough. And although, you know, it was very successful, we won world gold in 2005, 2006 and 2007. Really great performances. But by the time we arrived in Beijing, we'd had a very, very tough selection process for the final seats in Beijing. And we just didn't quite have the headspace, I think, that would have been advantageous at that point. And I think it's also easy to forget. Yes, we were really, really strong position. We were gold medalists, reigning world champions. But the Chinese were a very, very strong crew. They'd beaten us in the final race before Beijing, and the Germans had never lost in the history of the event. So it's easy to think that our crew is the strongest crew, but you know, it's a race on the day. And as you say, we lost it just in the last sort of 100 meters, but I'm still incredibly proud of what we put together. So it's, I guess tinged again with, it's always wonderful to win an Olympic medal, but it wasn't the one we were focused on winning.
Yeah, thanks. And, you know, I'm hearing you talk there. I remember how sad I was watching that. I watched that final thinking, oh yeah, they're going to win this. They're bloody brilliant. And it just, I remember watching the last 200 meters going, no, this, then, oh my goodness, it's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. How'd you go from there? Like, what was that like for the four of you? Because obviously, I guess in Athens, although you were disappointed, it was obviously your first Olympic medal and you were pretty pleased with that. It felt just so different watching it, that though you had this Olympic silver medal, an amazing achievement, almost felt like you'd lost. That's the feeling I got. What was that like? Right.
Yeah. So it did feel like we had lost. It felt like a huge wave of grief, the overwhelming feeling when we crossed the line. And I remember because Catherine was sitting in front of me and she just held her head in her hands and just let out this sort of groan of frustration that said to me, I will never, ever be able to turn the clock back 7 minutes. And that's all I need. Give me those 7 minutes again and I will do it differently, or we will do it differently. But I can't turn back time. And that absolute pure frustration. I think the other thing to say is it's not like anything. There's no comparison to that distilling your entire life's work into this really small bubble and to try and execute something with millions of people watching and to not deliver. And it's sort of big picture, little picture, isn't it? Because you've got millions of people that you don't even know, as well as really close friends and family who have flown across the world to be with you in this moment, and you haven't delivered. And I remember standing on the podium and seeing my dad in the crowd, and just the look in his eyes just said, it's okay. But that was almost worse because you could tell how much he was hurting, you know, how sad he was. And I can't imagine what that would be like as a parent, because they were never, ever pushy. They They'd never said I needed to win or could win, or it was never about winning. They enjoyed following me around the world, but it was as much to make friends with other parents and watch sport as anything else. So to see his pain was horrible. But I think the worst thing for certainly myself, Debbie and Catherine, was to know that for Annie, she wasn't feeling like we felt on the podiums in Athens, because when we won our first Olympic silver medals, we were basically pretty happy. But for Annie, this was her Olympic medal, her first Olympic medal, and she should be feeling on top of the world. And she wasn't. She was feeling like us, absolutely distraught. And we couldn't take that feeling of pain away. We couldn't reinsert, a different narrative and say, well, never mind, but you still won this one. So that was really, really hard to deal with. And I wish it could have been different. But I learned a lot from it. And, I value like every experience I've had, and the relationship I have with those guys is really close as well. And I remember sitting on the landing stage after we'd come back in and taken the riggers off the boat. And I think, Annie pushed Debbie in the water, and we all, ended up in a pile of sort of tears of laughter, frustration, tiredness, all of it. And to know that you can still on a day like that laugh with people that know what it's taken and what you've been through, and that the three of you or four of you will only know what that feels like, but you share it. That's incredibly special as well.
Thank you. I was very nervous about asking you that question. And I feel that like deep sense of loss. And I'd never thought about it from Annie's point of view. Like, for her, she had her first Olympic medal, and the silver medal, incredible achievement. Because the three of you were so sad and so devastated that, like, well, we're kind of not sharing in that joy, because I'm sure at some point it probably did feel joyful. But I love that you all then pushed each other in the water and had a bit of a laugh at some point during that process. How long was it before you look back on that with pride as opposed to with regret?
Right. So I'm not sure if I don't know, do I? I think the first thing to say is I came back to the UK, and although I still knew I had this vow and this desire to try and make 5 games, I knew I needed time out, and I couldn't guarantee that I would come back to the sport. I just knew that I needed time to repair mentally. And I said to myself, right, I'm not even going to finish the sentence in my mind. Am I going to come back? Do I want to come back? And I'll give myself as long as I need. All I remember is being in a dark room for a long time and actually really struggling to speak for many days. I came down to Cornwall. Actually, this is where I used to come down after Olympics and World Championships, just to feel very free down here. But, I actually did really struggle to form sentences. I think I was just processing so much in my mind and trying to come to sort of an equilibrium about it. That, it just took a long time. I think it was about February, March time where I started to feel like I was getting some energy back. But I do also remember feeling in the couple of months after Beijing, I was aware that I was exhausted. It had been we pushed so hard and worked so hard towards that race in Beijing that if we had won, I wondered if we would have been relieved instead of elated. And I thought to myself, I never want to cross the finish line and be relieved. I want to feel, as you say, pride. I want to feel absolute joy at what I've created with my teammates. And I'm doing it wrong in some way if I win Olympic gold and my overriding feeling is relief. So that was something I wanted to make sure that I learned from.
It's so interesting, that feeling of relief. You read a lot about that. Kathy Freeman talks about this, that she won Olympic gold in Sydney in front of, the whole of their country watching her. She just felt relieved. It was over, for goodness sake. Steve Redgrave talked about this a lot in his last 2 games. He was just relieved that he got it done. And it wasn't, it was joyful later, but at the time it was just relief that we got that over the line. And I wonder if that, maybe not the experience you were hoping for.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a huge amount to put oneself through. And I think it is very hard to explain. And we were talking about this earlier, but, in any year, and I need to get better at maths, but, so you've got 360 days in a year, and it's that amount of training is about as equally important as holding yourself together in those last few days. And then that last 24 hours, they each become proportionately more important and harder to handle. And the emotional control and understanding you need to have to be able to hold it together to deliver a performance is absolutely, it's like scraping through your brain. And well, that's what I found it like. So it's, from the outside, it may seem like you've done all the training, you deliver what you're capable of, but actually mentally it is about so much more than that. So yeah, and I think, as you say, you gave those two examples, and gosh, I remember Matthew Pinsent on the podium in Athens. I mean, he crumbled. He just, is absolutely pouring with tears. And I think that really showed how much one puts oneself through.
Oh yeah, totally. And if you read his book, it talks about trying to hold it together and just having nothing left. I'd like to fast forward, if that's okay. Not because it's not, I'd love to learn about it all, but we've been here a long time. The journey into Rio, and reading through your book and getting a sense of this, you use the term burnout kind of after London, home games and so on, that you reckoned you were just totally burned out. Could you maybe give us a bit of a sense of where that came from and kind of what followed next?
Yeah. So what I look back and see now is really that what I, as you say, call burnout was the physical manifestations of emotional stress. So I was push. I'd had a big hip operation in 2009, actually, after I came back, and I felt like it was my job to be the leader and to make other crews win again. And I was the experienced one, and it was up to me. It was on my shoulders, and I need to push everything forward and pull everyone along with me and tell everyone how it's done. So I tried really, really hard, put loads of energy into it. And, it exhausted me, and it was, I'm sure, pretty unpleasant for other people to be around. And as we all know, that's not an effective way really to work with people. And so, but what I found was that I was just completely exhausted. And the first thing that happened was my back sort of went in some way, and I found myself on my bedroom floor swapping a bag of frozen peas for a hot water bottle over and over again for about 2 weeks. But what this did give me was a time to reflect and to press pause. And I realized that there was no way that I would be going, if I got in a rowing boat again at that point, that would be a miracle. But I wouldn't make an Olympic team, and no crew that I was in was going to come together and do well if I carried on approaching it in the way that I was. So that was when I took a really hard look at myself. I really assessed where my best performances had come from in the past. I realized that when I performed at my best, I wasn't actually focused on going fast. I was focused on, right, what can we as 4 people create together? And what will be from that. And that was when I seemed to bring out my best and freest performances. And although it felt far-fetched that I could possibly make another crew and be up in a rowing boat again, I still believed that my body was capable. If I could get myself standing upright again, I believed I was capable. And so I said, right, well, I've got 2 years. I'm going to give it another go, crawl myself back up again. But I need to redefine what I see as success, because my definition at the moment of success equals gold is making me ill and injured. It's very unpleasant to be around, and it simply is not working. So what I can see now is that I basically shook hands with defeat, and I said, okay, well, it's okay that if I don't win, that's okay. It's not that I don't believe that I still could win, but I have to understand that it's okay if I don't. And I reconciled myself, because to me that was failure, but I reconciled myself with it. I shook hands with it. I looked myself in the eye and I said, you've got to be okay with this. And I redefined success. And I said it would be to stand on the Olympic podium with my arms around my teammates and feel joy at what we've created, not relief. And in that moment, it was like a hose pipe of stress. Hose pipes, they get sort of all kind of twisted up and the water can't get through. And when you untwist it, suddenly everything just goes through really smoothly and comes out really fast. And it was like I had untwisted the hose pipe, and I kid you not, I did not get injured again from that moment through until Rio. And I felt like I was so much more in line with myself. And I knew that in order to have this moment that I wanted, how I wanted to feel on the podium, in order to feel like that, I needed to have a much, much closer eye on how I was behaving every day. And that I needed to, if I wanted that moment on the podium to be genuine between us as people, I needed to understand all of my teammates in every day leading up to that. And I also said to myself, I don't have to be in this crew. I believe that it's possible for another women's crew, be it at that point a quad or an 8. But in 2016, I moved on into the 8, and I believe it's possible for a British women's 8 to win a medal. I don't have to be a part of it, but my satisfaction is going to come from knowing that I've contributed to it in some way, and to those people having a really positive experience at the games. And I don't think I could have done that and stepped myself away from it if I hadn't already been to 4 and felt like I'd exhausted every attempt to try and make the most of my ability. But, it was when I was in the middle of the final in Rio and we were closing down on the Americans who went on to win gold, that I realized that actually changing my mindset like this had taken me closer to gold than I ever thought would be possible again. So not only was it more enjoyable, not only did it make it possible for me to actually function again, but it released so much more in myself. And it meant that I almost took a helicopter ride. I stood back and I went from being this dictator to much more of a sort of energy director. And hopefully and everyone in this group played their part. And it's the same in every team. Everyone plays their part. But I hope a little bit of a part that I played was, instead of being overbearing like I was before, I just wanted every single person in that group to be able to express themselves fully. Really believe that what is inside of each of us is enough, and we express ourselves most powerfully as our most natural selves. So I really wanted us to go out there in Rio and express ourselves, what we had created. And so I think we did that. And it was a dodgy moment in the middle there. But we did come through the field from last to second. And so, yeah, it was a real journey, and it was a learning journey, changing my mindset from it being all about gold to what can we create together, and really taking a step back from those reins to see what's possible and what grows if you stop trying to hold on to everything.
I want to ask you more about the Rio final in a second, but I wonder if we could just circle back to something you said earlier that I'm just really interested in. So we talked about that slightly prophetic moment when you decided, right, I'm going to be the first woman to go to 5 Olympic Games in rowing in Great Britain, and I'm going to win Olympic gold. I'm wondering if you think, looking back now, that writing that slightly prophetic goal, did that in some way cause any of the issues that you then felt later on, that you'd committed to this is what I'm going to do and this is what I'm going to be? Do you think it caused you issues?
Yeah, I'm sure it did, but I'm sure it had as many upsides as well. I mean, the one of the reasons I actually really struggle to talk about sport and in any way relate it to everyday life is because they really aren't the same. So in sport, in elite sport, we have this incredible opportunity to concentrate just on sport, and our whole lives revolve around it, this goal that we have. There are many, many people in the team. So we've got doctors, physios, coaches, all sorts of support staff who are there to facilitate us concentrating on this one thing. So our life is really simple and really, really clean. And I think me making this really clear goal was really powerful, because I was like, well, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And I didn't get distracted by other things. Yes, I felt like I needed to manage my studies, but that was part of a picture. It was a jigsaw. It's a constructive jigsaw and part of a process. And yeah, I think, I dug a hole for myself, but it suited my personality. And I think it worked for a while, and then it stopped working. And I needed to, I just, like with anything, if you do something too much, you just get too far down one end of a scale. And I became, I was just trying to become more and more focused on that one thing, and lost the balancing things around me.
Okay, thank you. Rio, it's great reading the book, because as an outsider just watching it, you get this sense of some of the social media banter and chat that you girls had amongst yourselves. But reading the book, you get a real sense of the ins and outs of that. Now, if people read some of the books about Steve Redgrave and so on, he was forever labelled the old man by the time he got to the end of his career, because he did have 3 kids and so on. How would you have described your role within that group of people, which you described, at the start of your career, 4 people who were very, very similar. And you said this crew of 8 of you, or 9 of you, including the Cox, who were incredibly different. How did you kind of position yourself within that group?
Right. Well, I was definitely positioned as the old woman. That's for sure.
I didn't want to say that. But
yeah. No, I was definitely the old woman. But that was fine. I could totally wear that mantle. That was, that meant that I could ask them to carry my blade for me. So I didn't do that. Yeah, we were really different. But, I'd never rode in an 8 before, not at that level really. So for me, it was as much an adventure learning from them. And I've always loved, especially having been on the team for a while, or even if we were in an established crew and someone subbed in, I really wanted to hear what fresh eyes had to say, because I think they tell so much. And, it was for me, I admired a lot of these girls, sort of from being in other crews for many years. And I just, at this point, I wanted to make sure I was just one of 8 of us, that I rode my seat well. And I refer to it in the book, like, what can I contribute other than power and skill? Because I knew I wasn't going to get that much more powerful or that much more skillful I joined the sweep team, the rowing team for this crew at the very start of January in 2016. So I had 8 months basically, and I could row with one oar all right, and it would get a bit better. But I knew from all the Olympic finals that I'd been in that really it was about how we handled that last 24 hours, and that would determine whether we delivered what we were capable of or not. So I really concentrated, and this is what I tried to distill in the book. Like I knew that I had all this learning and I wanted to distill it in the most constructive way possible. And I tried to keep things really, really simple. And I think that's something that I did throughout my career. I was often responsible for the race plans, and I always tried to distill all of what we had worked on into some very, very simple pictures or concepts, so that when it came to racing, when it came to that moment of pressure, we all knew in a word, in an instant, exactly what we needed to do, and we would respond in the same way. So I think that's the role I tried to take on, is to make sure that things stayed really simple. I tried to make sure that everything was about trusting our process, trusting each other, absolutely instilling and giving each other permission to believe in ourselves. I've really felt that was often a little bit of a blocker in crews that I'd been in. It's okay to believe in ourselves. It doesn't mean that you're arrogant. It doesn't mean that you think you're going to win or anything, but absolutely give yourself permission to believe in yourself. So I had a few kind of building blocks: that belief, the trust, build to a point where we could have honest conversations and enable others to fully express themselves. And that, as I say, everyone in the crew plays their own role. And I really, at this point, really enjoyed what other people brought and the real mix of it, rather than, 5 years before that, I absolutely thought there was a carbon copy of what a champion should be and how they should behave, and everyone should conform and put tracing paper on top of that. So this was very different, but it was really enjoyable. But, as I say, I think if it had been my 2nd or 3rd Olympics, I don't know if I'd been able to let go like that. But I knew that every day was a bonus and a privilege. So I'm so glad I got the opportunity to row with the people that I did.
Yeah, no, the sense of it comes over now, and I got it when I was reading your book as well. There was a dodgy moment in that Olympic final. I watched back the race again yesterday to remind myself of that. I had forgotten that you were as far back as you were, and you talked about this idea that, this was your 5th Olympic Games, so you knew that there comes a point in every Olympic final when you get the question asked of you and you've got to find an answer to that. Mm. And that's when the kind of test of your preparation and so on comes to fruition, that moment. So, dodgy moment, the Americans have gone off unbelievably quickly, and you are 6th through 500 and through 1,000, I think, right, looking back at it. How did you as a group the crew cope with that dodgy moment, as you put it?
Right. Yeah. So you're right. Sitting on the Olympic start line in Rio, with that Christ the Redeemer statue just above me, I knew that my career would be defined in the next 6.5 minutes. I'd had an up and down time in the last sort of 10 years of it. And if it went well, great. If it went badly, that could rest on my shoulders and at least not be a good way to end it all. But we had a plan, and the commitment we made to each other was to execute the plan that we had made. And Zoe de Toledo, our cox, was incredible because yes, we were down, but I remember her so loud and clear. She said, everyone else has gone off too hard. We're doing the rowing that we said we were going to do. This is our best rowing. Keep doing it. Trust me. And we trusted each other. And the thing that I wanted to do was do something completely different. Start becoming really, just really physical, throw the plan out the window, all of that. But, I had made a commitment and we had practiced and we knew what made ourselves go as fast as we could. And, she was right. Others had gone off too hard and we came back through the field. But that was where our trust in each other and how much we understood each other and we understood the plan. That was when that really counted, because we actually only won silver over bronze by a photo finish. And I can absolutely guarantee that tiny, tiny margin was about us and our trust in each other, and how we handled that moment in staying clear, staying calm, saying the right things to each other in that moment and being able to do that. And there's someone actually listening to you when you've got no oxygen left and your head's screaming and you're absolutely terrified that you're going to throw away a chance at an Olympic medal. But that's where the relationships really count.
I love what you said there. That's where the relationships count. That's where it all comes together. It's always nice in a story, isn't it, when we have a happy ending? So it was the same color for the third time, but I got this amazing sense listening to you today that those 3 silvers felt very different for different reasons. And if anyone hasn't watched it, where have you been? Go on YouTube, look it up, the final. They are going absolutely mental after that victory. And you talk about this in the book, that the other girls were a bit younger than you and you were quite happy to watch them jumping around like maniacs. And you were just kind of enjoying that moment. In that moment, this is a hard question. You might not have an answer for it. What would you say to yourself in Beijing? That was 8 years earlier, and we did have a happy ending. It was the same color.
Yeah.
What would you say now to yourself in Beijing on that podium?
I think this is the same answer as when people say to me, what would you tell your younger self? And, the pressure that other people put on you, you don't have to take that on yourself. And it's okay that it is your journey. And if you feel proud that you've got an Olympic silver medal, that's okay. So, I would say the same thing. It's for each of us, it's our own journey, and other people's pressures don't have to be our own.
Great. In a second, I'm going to try and summarize this incredible conversation, but I want to ask you, before we get to the final bit, what's next for you? So you retired after Rio, retired on the podium, finished on a high. What's next in the story of Frances Houghton?
Oh, well, the story of Frances Houghton. Who knows? Well,
there's
2 dogs arriving this weekend. Never had a dog before, and my partner's going back to work the next day, so I'm a little bit nervous about that. But yeah, over the last 4 years, I have been putting my book together, distilling my learnings into something really nice and succinct and easy to read and digest. It is, it's rich content, but it was really important to me to pass on the learnings from my experiences in a meaningful way, which is why I've produced something like colourful and I hope and is easy to read and understand, and is a mix of really pragmatic stuff and a much more emotional, deeper, personal stories through my career. So yeah, I'm enjoying seeing where this can lead me. Talking with people, for me, the book is the start of a conversation. And if I can enable others to have a really positive experience in sport, I do think sport is at the elite end is really, really hard, but it can be incredibly rewarding as well. And so that's what I'd love to see more of and to have more conversations about.
Thank you. I was going to ask you what was your wish for sport, but you've kind of gone there already. Okay, stuff that is sitting with me from this conversation. And I'll get to listen back to it again when I do the post-production piece. But I love how you started. I'll just carry on until other people overtake me. It just took them a bit longer than I expected. Just it still makes me tickle that you said that. Makes me laugh. In this kind of prophetic, I'm going to do everything I can to get to Sydney, and then I'm going to go on to be the most successful Olympian that I can possibly be. I love what you talked about as the years went by, kind of compartmentalizing your life a bit more. So, rowing and life and study. And, you've got this lovely image in your book of the big circle with life, and rowing is like a circle within it, but not the whole circle. I thought that really sat with me.
So that picture, actually, when I drew it as a sketch that I had on my kitchen table, and I'd leave it there so that, and sometimes if I was being particularly intense about rowing and felt like I was starting to overthink it, I'd put it on my doormat as I left, so that when I came back in from training, I literally had to trip over it to get into my front door, to remind myself, keep it in perspective.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, so it just sat with me, and it's a good thing for young athletes maybe to have a think about, have a look at. That real piece around self-awareness, understanding you and understanding how you interact with others, when you're at your best, when you're at your worst, and when's that helpful, when's that not so helpful, when do we need to dial up and dial down some of those things a little bit. We talked about Beijing and the grief that you described there, and yeah, your dad doing what all dads do, right? It'll be okay. Yeah, a bit heartbreaking to hear that. And then you kind of this idea of coming to an equilibrium, coming to a place where you can make sense of that, the burnout and the journey that went through that. And then I suppose the real nugget of this, if anyone's listening at home, is this idea of redefining success. And you said, I shook hands with defeat and said, it's okay if I don't win. And just this idea of being able to stand on the Olympic podium with your teammates and feel joy, which had just not been the emotion you had felt previously. And it sounds very much like you kind of got there by the end of Rio. Wow, there was an awful lot in there, everyone. I hope you were listening and hope you've enjoyed it. There's just, masses and masses. I am so grateful to Frances for her time. Where can we follow you? Where can we keep an eye on what you're up to? Where can people get hold of your book?
All right. So the book is available through my website, which is www.franceshoughton.co.uk. And that's Frances with an E and Horton, Houghton. So www.franceshoughton.co.uk. I'm occasionally prop up on Instagram and Twitter. I am terrible at it and I completely forget it exists. But when I do pop up, it's at Horton Frances on both of those. So yeah, that's where I am. I have done the book entirely myself, hence why it's only available through my website. And I know we chatted about this before, didn't we, Doug? So it's so simple to think, just go on Amazon. But unfortunately, that's not possible. I've used local people down here, local printer. Everything's been produced in Cornwall. Even my web design is in Cornwall, and recycled paper down here. So as the book was originally, I produced it as a gift for the coaches and friends and teammates and family who had helped me get over the line that last time. And so it was produced as a gift, and I've kept it as it was originally meant. So that is how it is. And I hope people enjoy it if they do want to get hold of it from themselves.
Thank you. I will stick all that information in the description for the podcast, and it will go out on social media. She'll probably not engage with it, but it'll go out there anyway.
I'll try.
It is, it's a real joy. And you're right. It's not a normal, like a traditional autobiography type read. It's just you distilling down. There's just so much in there. So yeah, I'm really, really grateful to you for your time. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story. I hope people get lots out of it. I'm hopeful we'll get a lot of discussion. Like you say, it's the start of a conversation, not the end of one. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. Keep an eye out for future podcasts and hit subscribe to make sure that you don't miss out. And obviously everyone at the moment, please stay safe.